Every paw has a story, some filled with love, some with pain, but all of them deserve hope. Welcome to Tales of Hope, voices for the voiceless, hope for every paw. Here, we speak for those who can't, and together, we create hope, one paw at a time.
Today we have a very wonderful guest who is in animal protection, and her name is Anita V. Anita, welcome to the show. Can we understand what initially sparked your interest into animal protection and environmental law?
Sure. Hi, Anil. It's really such a pleasure to be here. And I'm excited to be talking about a lot of things that we're going to get into. I started volunteering at Blue Cross, to be honest, as my first formal, I guess, interaction with any sort of institution that does rescues and takes care of lots of animals. But I think from school, I had this habit where sometimes I would bring back home a stray cat or a stray dog or sometimes a bird. And then over time, it became a little bit of a concern to my parents, where my parents told me, why don't you sort of do this productively? You really like it. Why don't you explore where you can volunteer? And I think with Blue Cross, when I was in Chennai, I volunteered. And when I was volunteering over there, interacting with so many animals and so many real life issues that you see only when you volunteer on ground, my supervisor, Mr. Don Williams, told me, why don't you write press releases, or why don't you help us make content along with your volunteering? Because, we don't have full-time staff here that helps us do this. So to be able to channel what I was studying, which was journalism at the time, and also help animals and help an institution have adoption drives and get more animals adopted, etc., was something that I really enjoyed. And when I studied liberal arts in Delhi, I was again volunteering for some time whenever I could at Friendicos and outside our universities for the puppies and dogs over there. And then we come to law school, which I studied at Symbiosis in Pune. And my roommate and I did rescue a few cats and sort of smuggle them in the PG that we were staying in. And as we moved into our apartments, we started taking care of cats over there as well. And when I graduated law school, I was convinced that environmental law is where I can make an impact in terms of both my interests and my skills. But I saw a LinkedIn post from Nalsar University for a research associate position at the Animal Law Center, which when I read the kind of work that they do and the programs that they have, it really sparked my interest. And I think that was the COVID time, so 2021. So I had been doing a lot of internships online just on research and course facilitation and legal education. So this was something that I applied to, and I didn't know whether or not I would be hired for the position because I didn't have any formal experience researching animal protection. It was more of labor law, domestic violence, adjudication, etc. So that was where my interest began. And when I worked there was when I truly understood all the issues or the legal issues that we see in animal protection that are most pertinent. And I guess a lot of them would be things that we're going to be talking about today as well. But this is where I started.
All right. It's been quite an interesting journey, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Now, coming back to my next question would be, how was your experience? Because from what I understand, you've also done at National Law University in Odisha. And how did that influence your focus on animal welfare?
So when I was working at Nalsar University, we were doing a lot of research into factory farming, into the true cost of egg production, and also developing material for the MA and the diploma program in animal protection laws. So there was a lot of work that was being done at the center. And when I left my tenure at the center, I wanted to study animal protection more in detail, particularly factory farming and in India. I mean, a better way I think for me to put it would be I wanted to understand the industrial animal agriculture industry in India, and understand the ecosystem quite systematically to see what kind of efforts would have the best kind of impacts, because we see that there are public policy initiatives that work, there are private policy initiatives that are being talked about, like ESG and CSR, things like that as well, and accountability of producers. So I really wanted to dedicate time to understand one law more focused, in a manner that's more in depth, which you get to do at your LLM, plus also do your own research, which is what I did, studying industrial animal agriculture in India and the link with green criminology.
Wow, quite an interesting fact. Now, I also understand that you were mentoring a lot of students, and teaching law courses. How has it enriched your understanding about animal protection issues?
I think when I was teaching, it was mostly facilitating sort of guest lectures at the MA Animal Protection Laws program, and also just being able to interact with a lot of students because we were organizing the program at Nalsar. So one which was really exciting to me was to see how many animal law advocates were already there in India, and also from across the world, because we had a few international students as well, and how many people were interested in being trained to understand these issues more. So we had brilliant people who worked with state animal welfare boards. We also had people from very small towns where they operated their animal shelters or their rescue operations. So you got to really see the depth and the breadth of the kinds of people working in animal protection, and just listening to them interact with faculty in class, or any of the sessions that we gave, answering their viva questions and doing their projects and assessments, right? All of that was really exciting to see. When I was in NLU Odisha, I was the mentor at the society when they were just revamping and starting the society. I think this year, especially, the society has its first paper presentation along to understand constitutional rights and the spaces for animals in constitutional law. So the society is doing more and more exciting work, and that is pretty exciting because, like Symbiosis Law School and NLUO, there are quite a few institutions where students have societies for non-human animals on campus. So I think this has really inspired me when I'm studying animal protection or when I am a practitioner in the area, to just understand different perspectives, because the issues and the solutions are very um, closely interconnected. And for us to get and act on these solutions, you need to have a variety of perspectives and include those perspectives.
Honestly, to be honest, I am really enlightened by that, by your information that has come out, that, these Symbiosis, NLU, and there are these other institutes that they have been working so hard. Because for me, I mean, in terms of students having society, because I was really not aware of all this, because I thought it's only the feeders, because that is what I am connected to, and I've been just hearing their side. But hearing your side really gives a lot of encouragement to people. I'm sure about that.
Absolutely. And just to sort of interject, it's because I think that we don't often, unless we work in these areas, we don't get to hear about all of these things, right? So only when you work in the field, you understand that. I think Humane World for Animals, which was formerly HSI, Humane Society International India, they've been doing a lot of help for campuses that may be interested in having a non-human policy, and for how to solve animal and human conflict on campuses, because that becomes a big question when we study in colleges. There are some people who are scared of animals, and then some people who are not. So I think, yeah, I completely agree, because it was only a few years back, and when interacting with these students from these societies, that I was aware of all of these initiatives. And I'm sure there are way more than we are aware of.
I'm sure, you see, because you really highlighted one very important aspect. Until and unless you don't put your skin in the game, I don't think you will know the real issues that have been going out there. Because for me
Yeah.
also, it was just like, I would say, it's been just 3 years, not even three. I
Yeah.
would say 4 since we got our first pet home. I mean,
Right.
and since then life has been very different. It's like you look at things very differently. Not that I didn't look at it before differently. When I was back in Mumbai, I had 17 stray cats that I used to take care of.
Wow.
So I don't know, it's been a very natural way of me taking care of
Yeah.
these voiceless. But I think actively I've been more involved since last 4 years, since we had our first kid. Now, coming back to the whole question, how would you describe the current state of animal protection law in India, particularly related to factory farming?
So
Since
I
you were
think again, yeah.
sorry.
Tell me.
No, since you were talking more about, your research on factory farming and things like that, so can we understand how is that area at this point in time?
I think that that's a very loaded question. That's the first thing to give you a very simplistic and very short answer. I think it would be a little bit more nuanced and complicated than that. But I think a good way to sort of ease into the answer would be to understand that factory farming, or what we call industrial animal agriculture, has multiple different stakeholders, and the way in which our traditional backyard farms, right, that were operated by very small farmers, local producers, has evolved into this hasn't been particularly linear. And we can see that even in other countries it's not exactly been linear, but because of the fact that because of multiple factors, which is how one would call all activities that have become more commercial, more fast paced, more sort of cyclical, right, and urbanized, more to say, in this aspect. We have industrial animal agriculture farms, which we call factory farms, because the animals kept in these farms are being farmed. They are farmed animals, that is specifically for food or other goods, I would say, in the market. So India has no dedicated law for factory farming, although there was an attempt to pass the factory farming bill in 2020, but we don't have a specific legislation targeting factory farming. So where we pick up all the laws that impact factory farming are from different areas. So just to give you a very simple example, is that a lot of factory farms would have a lot of waste that are being generated because they house a lot of animals, more than they should. And the conditions on these factory farms, excuse me, research shows that the conditions are not sanitary or hygienic for both the workers there, as especially for the animals housed there. So a lot of times what happens is that there is improper waste disposal, or there may be contamination of water from and these are reported. And if you just Google sort of factory farms wastewater, you'll see a lot of news articles that come up from a whole bunch of regions in India where people have complained about this, or this has become a case, right? So that act of pollution would come under our water pollution laws in India. And because that is coming from a factory farm, that now becomes a law that applies to factory farms. So although we don't have a specific legislation on factory farms, all of the laws that would cover the acts that are done by factory farms, by establishments like factory farms, would become laws that apply to factory farms. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Honestly, you've really got me thinking. And, you know, given with my limited knowledge that I have been in this, animal welfare and protection, what you're highlighting to me, honestly, is like a news to me. Okay, I would say my last guest also was from, she does a lot of work in terms of more of animal
Yeah.
welfare and vegan outreach. She was from vegan outreach, and with the what you rightly mentioned, about the state of the factory farms, because this girl, this lady, the kind of information she was giving me, and to be honest, it is a very sad state to understand. Now,
Absolutely.
it has been actually a wake up call for people who have a bit of soul and they want to do something. If they start listening and hearing and they understand the kind of inhumane treatment that has been going on, uh, I think it is a very sad state.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Coming,
mean, just to all of the people as well, like I said, this information is something that we only get to know, or the only way we get to know about it is when we become interested and when we sort of have to research and look at it. So I think that, like you said, right, there are a lot of issues concerning a lot of issues in animal protection, whether it's factory farming or animals in experimentation or wild animal suffering, right? All of these issues are interconnected with so many different areas that it doesn't become simply a legal issue. Law
yes,
becomes one of the tools that can solve it or sort of prevent it to a certain extent, or monitor it, penalize, but they are not legal issues per se to begin with. They don't start out as legal issues.
legal issues, yeah. But I think it is more of, I would say it's more of a human responsibility. We humans have to be, you know, have to somehow look at it as at a more human way of treating these voiceless souls. I mean, I call them voiceless, but I think it is just the way we treat them. I think that is more
Yeah,
important. Now,
absolutely.
coming back to my next question would be, what are some of the key legal challenges that India faces when it comes to enforcing animal welfare standards?
Right. So I think for this, because it was such a big, again, these are very loaded questions, but to just give a little bit of a simplistic answer that would encompass all of these issues, right? Is that we have some of the problems that we face is institutional, and some of the problems that we face are, of course, legal, and some are also problems that we have in terms of tracking implementation. So sometimes, again, just to give you an example, so when we study pandemic preparedness and how we talk about animals being protected in pandemics, right? One of the things we need to study and understand is how do we define public health. Who are the actors who are responsible in enforcing a national policy and then a state level policy and a district level policy. Um, Again, in terms of having, say, an aquaculture farm, if there are any diseases that come out that the fish have, and the farm is located in a very remote area, how does the process of notification start? How do we notify that now there's a probably a zoonosis disease that is spread in this area? So we have a lot of different actors that take part in public health, and in terms of the constitutional schedules and how the subjects are divided, right? Several subjects overlap between the state and the center. In terms of local issues like disease outbreaks, now we need the district government and the local panchayats and local officers to also get into the scene. Uh, Unless we have a cohesive and seamless system that tracks and allows all of these different actors to act in a harmonious way, and this starts from the farm, so the owner of the farm, the operator of the farm, right, to whichever state or central government is concerned. Standardization and saying how do we improve and implement standards will be very difficult, because for us, harmonizing actors in terms of different areas in India, because India is huge, the kind of local circumstances that exist from district to district and state to state, in terms of access to refrigerators for storing vaccines for cows, or in terms of having a veterinarian that is licensed by the government or the state animal welfare board nearby a farm. All of these itself need to be studied first before we say, hey, let's have welfare standards. We also have a lot of international guiding documents that are great starting points, like the World, I think, the World Organization for Animal Health. It was formerly called the OIE. They developed a strategy in 2018 on having global animal welfare practices. The Food and Agriculture Organization releases reports on the food and agriculture industry. Every year, some years they study aquaculture, some years they study livestock, intensive livestock farming, but they usually have reports that talk about how do we get to better animal welfare standards. So I think all of those, I just made note of the OIE standard, where they had a global animal welfare strategy, and they talk about different pillars, right? So we have roadmaps that already exist that don't need much of a reinvention. But what we do need to understand whether these roadmaps are applicable to us, what are the conditions that are unique to us that we now need to think about, what animal welfare standards are correlative with public health, with labor issues, with environment issues, and how do we incorporate it from a constitutional level to a policy level, are all things we need to think about before we decide on the question of how do we just improve animal welfare standards. Yeah.
Anita, honestly, this has been a very enriching conversation for me, because I am trying to, it's not only me. I'm sure the audience, once they start listening, it would be enriching for them even. But I think the most important aspect, since you were saying, which I gather, it is more of a willpower to, implement all these things. Yeah, given,
Correct.
I would 100% agree with you. Yes, India is huge, we are diverse, but I think more than all that, it is, do we have the willpower
Yes.
to,
Willpower and inclusivity, I think. So, I
yes,
mean, to understand the ecosystem, legislators need sources of information. So when research and advocacy organizations start working with legislators to give them this information and to give them data, it becomes a point at which they are able to now understand what needs to be prioritized.
yes,
And maybe from there we have efforts, because I know that legislatures, at least state level legislators, do reach out to animal protection organizations and ask them for advice, try to work with them. I'm not sure of the overall numbers. I'm quite sure that we may find that it may not be sufficient, but I think it's really important for us to be one in terms of what we're working towards, and also understand the kind of inclusive messaging we want, because we're not trying to say we want animal protection over human protection. So it doesn't become a contest. It doesn't become an issue of being like repressing marginalized communities or putting forth an agenda. So I think those are the beginnings for us to discuss and come together to understand how we can sustainably do this, because we don't want this to be removed in a fixed term of years, right?
yes, absolutely. I think, I would truly agree and believe with you. It has to be coexistence. We have to have harmony and balance it out. Uh, Absolutely. Now, coming back to my next question would be, how do India's constitutional provisions support or hinder efforts to improve animal protection?
I think we have some constitutional articles which cast a twofold duty. One is the state's responsibility, or it's a principle that the state has to follow, that it has to protect flora and fauna and wildlife and the environment. And the other is a duty that we have under Article 51G, which is to have a sense of compassion and a duty towards the animals and the environment around us. So constitutionally, if we want to, speak in a legal way, these are the provisions that are there in the Constitution. But just like multiple other provisions, and just like how we spoke about how laws from different areas affect animal protection, we see that the constitution becomes a central level of a grund norm, is what we call it in law, from where different legislations or policies can be enacted. So the constitution does what it can do in its present existence, right? I'm not talking about an ought to and a should be, but from its current existence, we see that we have a lot of legislations that protect animals that come from it, like the Wildlife Protection Act or even the Water Pollution Acts. We have Article 21, under which I think one of the judgments that a lot of people talk about in animal protection is the Animal Welfare Board of India versus A. Nagaraja judgment. So we see that through certain articles in the Constitution, like Article 21, Article 51G, and 48A, that you have a basis from which there is a lot of possibility for animal protection. So the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act also comes from the fact that animals have some sort of a constitutional status. And you see that there are parts of the act that recognize and use terms like unnecessary suffering, right? Now, does it exhaustively define what unnecessary suffering is in the way that people like me who work in farmed animal protection would call that unnecessary suffering as well? That remains to be a question of how we say law can do this, or how we say that the constitution can now have more nuanced protection for animals or give animals sentience. So I think that would be a good way for me to answer this question without oversimplifying it too much.
No, Anita, I tell you, this conversation is really, for me as well, it's a learning curve, because I've been learning the kind of articles you were mentioning. 2151, I was aware of, the Article 51, but there are so many other, the two other articles, the 21 and the 48, what you were mentioning is really, really learning curve for me, and I'm sure the audience would also gain a lot of knowledge from this. Anita, coming back to my next question, which would be, what legal reforms do you believe are most critical for strengthening animal protection in India?
I think one is to have let me just take a crack at it again. I think one of the biggest and most necessary reform is to think about implementation. So when we say have the ABC rules or any sterilization or vaccination, neutering rules, to understand how we can implement this on a district level when we have feeding programs. Now, I know that the Animal Welfare Board of India releases guidelines that cover a lot of these issues to explain how feeders must be selected and what kind of responsibilities do associations have, etc. But I think implementation, and I think monitoring and tracking implementation is the most necessary at the moment. And in my study, and I think this is purely just my opinion, law can actually intervene in something like this and do this successfully, because monitoring and tracking and implementation are things that can be legally sound and be made through legislations and policy frameworks. And now, using all of the advent of technology, and just some of the facts that I know is that state governments, while making policies at the state government level, also have monitoring evaluation frameworks. So making sure that when we pass a legal reform, it is accompanied by say rules or frameworks or guidelines for implementation, and having let's say a tracking period of 6 months to make sure that we find out what systems work and what systems don't work would be really important. And just to sort of give you an example, there was I think in between 2009 and 2015 or 16, for one particular disease that was affecting cows, right? the central government decided to implement a nationwide vaccination program. I don't remember the name of the disease except that it starts with a B and it has a very intimidating scientific name. It's that they were doing vaccinations and having responses to emergency cases, etc., all over the country. And a lot of studies that look at the effectiveness of this program, actually veterinarians say that this is a very successful program in terms of how it was implemented in addressing this. But where it didn't live up to the standard and what caused it to a large extent was one of the things I mentioned earlier, which was in a lot of remote areas when the vaccinations were being done in the summer, because this was a disease that came about in a certain season. There were no electrical outputs that would keep refrigerators to store the vaccines.
Wow.
Right? So this is a logistical issue. So when we make these reforms, or when we talk about reforms, I think what I'm coming to say is that we change the mindset of how we define a reform. So we hear that when the judiciary makes some pronouncement that advances animal protection, right? I would say any advancement that helps the animals and the environment is a win. It is something that we can celebrate. It is something that we can build upon and understand how it can affect other areas that would make this, an overall win for us. So I think understanding implementation, understanding the ecosystem, and developing a roadmap to how we can make structures that work with other authorities. So, where there are overlapping subjects, where can the district officers or the district level of the government do a better job at tracking things, and where is the intervention of the state government necessary? So I think when we define these things and define it per the laws that already exist, they will be enough to start some legal reforms and sort of solidify some legal reforms. So let's take any law, do the entire systemic study, and see where we can implement what we've left out, how this can be made better, uh, interact with legislators, have an ecosystem understanding and mapping of how a roadmap can be made. And yeah, I think that would be the biggest legal reform that I think that is necessary, is to order more reports that come out of the state government and strengthen these monitoring systems.
I tell you, I've been thinking, with all you've been talking about, and I've been trying to absorb all this. I think most importantly, there needs to be a SOP that needs to be set out, I mean, and as you rightly said, there was a thing that you mentioned, that there was a logistical issue in the remote parts of India. Yes, I know, because when you work with the farmers and all that, because I do quite a bit of work with the farmers for herbs and all that, and I know they have storage issues and things like that. I think that is where, if you can if everybody can come together, right from the people who are on the ground to the people who are in the power, and set a proper SOP, and not only that, but get everybody involved in terms of the logistics, in terms of the people who are at the ground, the farmers and people who are doing. So you need to get everybody together. But I think this is my personal opinion, but I think the problem where we all lack is bringing everybody together on one table. And, anyways, now,
I think that would be I think that would be a very high level effort. But I think to just make that a little bit more realistic, right? One of the things that we can do, let's say, to just make something that, like, make the whole legal reform not sound so daunting, and make this not sound like such a daunting task, is that, say, we study all of the biggest producers that in India that, say, produce eggs, right? We sort of trace back, and I think in Animal Law Worldwide, which is a book that has like 27 animal protection issues from across different jurisdictions. One of the chapters is about industrial animal agriculture in, I think, the egg and the poultry industry. It's written by Malvika Parthasarathi. And we see that certain regions in India are produce more than others, right? We just need to localize our studies to understand the issues there. The way we communicate these issues, say, for example, in industrial animal agriculture, waste, improper disposal of waste is one. If we talk about it from an environmental perspective, if we talk it from an animal protection perspective, it is recognition of sentience and ensuring the recognition of sentience can work with the present laws. And I'm just talking about the reforms that we have with existing laws, not the ought to and the should be sort of sentience norms that we want, right? Is to make sure that we study the Law Commission report that's already been released. I think it's a 269th Law Commission report that talks about how cages should not be less than a certain size, how there is a particular way in which these farms have to operate, and a lot of licenses that they need to have. Now, if we take one district or one area in India, I don't know if we have that data to tell where I can tell you, Anil, you know what, none of these farms are operating legally, and that in itself is such a huge violation. So what we, I think, lack to, make very pointed legal reforms, very explicit, and say this is what we think and this is what everybody needs to do, is to combine it with one, data and evidence, and to present it in a way that is interconnected and intersectional, to go to legislators and the civil society groups and say, hey, you stand and your farmers stand to lose so much from this economic activity that you're promoting, right? Let's say dairy, you're promoting this as a national sort of economic activity. What is the reality is that we know, and again, this is, I think, coming from a Humane Society study where they talk about how the climate change deterioration, right? Climate change also affects the productivity of cows to produce milk. So when you're pushing something like this, the farmers are also not sort of winning. So this doesn't become a livelihood that is, say, very resilient to the effects of climate change. So we need to now have these things in our sort of arsenal or toolkit and communicate it in a way that convinces all of these different actors that exist in society from their different points of view and perspectives and interests to understand how this is a central issue, and how One Health, and the reason why everybody's talking about One Health and the government also talks about One Health is because it has become a pressing issue, that the only way we solve it is to understand how it percolates from one area to another and sort of fill those areas, and the outcome of that would automatically be better welfare. Would it be rights? Again, that's another loaded question, but it would be better welfare standards, if we look at it in this way.
I'll tell you what, I'll keep my fingers crossed. And, as we humans, we live on hope.
Yes,
hope, that is what keeps us all alive. So let's hope, better sense prevails amongst our legislators and all the actors, as you said.
But protection becomes, more rights.
Absolutely. Now, how can legislators balance the interest of various stakeholders, such as farmers, industry, animal rights advocates, when crafting animal welfare laws? Or let's say not even crafting. I would say, as you've been saying, the laws are there. How it can be, taken care of or implemented more?
I think, first of all, having trained expert practitioners in places where laws need to be drafted, or maybe that since my direct involvement with policy makers is limited at this point in my career, I would only imagine that they might already have experts, but having a range of experts, say one of them who is specialized in animal health, and one of them who's specialized in, say, the legal theories and philosophies that involve the social behavior of studying animals. one of them who is a legal expert, one of them who might be a expert litigator or a convener at a very big institution in India, right, or an organization. So I think having that representation is quite important. And second, and I think this comes back to a bigger uh, activity, is that when we have laws that are proposed in front of any of the houses of parliaments, or when we have any kind of amendments, etc., to make sure that when we get these feedback mechanisms through comments, right, you usually have a time in which the public can send comments and file responses to the amendments that are notified in the Gazette, to make sure that we have a holistic understanding of a particular issue. So, for example, if we want to pass something on factory farming, defining factory farm in an exhaustive way to include poultry birds, to include ducks, to include not just, fish, but shrimp farms, that is unnecessary. What I was trying to say is, when legislators begin crafting these laws, and when these laws are, one, being drafted, and two, being implemented, I think it's very essential to have ecosystem and stakeholder level conversations. Also, to have monitoring and evaluation systems, to ensure that something that is being passed right now at a district level or at a state level can be monitored, data can be available, data can be transparent, so that we can go back and work with more data. Because a lot of times, and this happens especially as a researcher in law and policy, we run around trying to understand where data can be accumulated from, or what is a standardized way to show data. So although this may be just from an academic and practitioner perspective, I think policymakers can really benefit clear understanding back, and how every stakeholder that the reform is impacting or is affecting, whatever adverse or beneficial impacts it has, can be balanced and equitable.
From what I understand from the entire conversation that we've had, especially pertaining to this question, in India, we lack a source where we have a data stored properly. Or,
Yeah.
I think from what I understand from you is we don't have enough data. And given we are supposed to be a technology hub, India with improving
Yeah.
IT sector. And I'm surprised nobody has looked into it, in terms of putting data together. You've really got me
Yeah,
thinking.
and I think, and secondly, I think even when we look at things like data and stakeholders, right, we don't have much data even from, say, a corporate sort of responsibility side as well.
Right.
So I was saying that one of the other actors that I think that when we talk about policymakers and an ecosystem level conversation, is producers as well. Understanding data from that angle, and understanding organizations, and even Humane World for Animals does this, is to help producers transition to a cage-free system. So if producers are interested and willing, you have support. And I think it's important to map out everything that's happening, whether it's in a governance level or a legal and a policy level, right? If we don't understand the ecosystem and the realities of the ecosystem, and here the realities of the conditions of the animals themselves, and all of the actors along with the animals, it'll be very difficult to build sustainable policies. It would just maybe be a bill, maybe be a law commission report, maybe be an advisory guideline, right? So I think, yes, we need strategic and sort of sustainable dialogues. And I think one of the things that people are interested in is, I haven't been following the implementation and the success of it, but the Netherlands had something called the livestock dialogue that the FAO quotes, where it brought together a lot of different ecosystem actors onto the table to discuss how factory farming needs to be phased out, or what can be done to mitigate the impacts of um, factory farming. And this was, again, Netherlands had a lot of data that sort of suggested that in the by 2050, I think, that the world demand for meat would go up by, I think, 70%. And this was going to put an incredible strain on animals themselves, on ecosystems, on the climate, on environment, because one of the issues that I don't think we've spoken about much is the cost of factory farming is also land use and water use to grow feed for the farmed animals. So that happens where a lot of forests get cut down and is a huge contributor to GHG emissions. So understanding these things comes from initiatives like dialogues. And I think these are ways that we need to explore how to bring in legal reforms or how to bring in sustainable policies in India.
Though, honestly, for the kind of points you've been highlighting, I think uh, I would say, from my point of view, or from my perspective, is a lot of people or a lot of actors ignore all these points. It's like they turn to give it a blind eye, because what you've been saying very truly, the kind of impact we're already facing with the climate and, everything that's been happening around us. We already know it. As humans, we know that what we're doing is wrong. But I think it's agreed at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's just when things go so fast paced. And I think, again, this may be a little bit of off topic rambling, but I came across a really interesting article that was released in 2022, a couple of weeks back, where what the researchers went out to do was to study the attitudes of people living in the BRICS countries versus Western European countries about animal laws that are concerning factory farms. So it was found that different regions, the people there, right, because there's measured attitudes of the people, and they sent out surveys to, I think, 1,000 people or more. So in some regions, it was found that after a certain age, and it was noticed that the pattern is that some brackets were identified where everybody in those age brackets tend to answer that they want better protection for animals, and people from a lower age bracket answered that no, we don't think that's necessary. And one of the reasons, when asked, was possibly that the researchers point out, is them wanting to adopt certain standards or attitudes that they see replicated in media, or they see as being the standards of living, right? And to some people, especially when you talk about in economic scenarios, right, having more protein or more animal protein is seen as a sign of prosperity. And certain countries, these things were attributed to the reasons behind these answers being implemented. But I think my point by quoting that is that all of this data gives us a lot of insight, especially as those people involved in the movement, because I think all of my answers have been definitely from a perspective who works in this area.
In
As
the
someone who
industry.
works in this area, who's someone who wants to continue her work in this area, right? Is that understanding all of this points us as organizations or individuals working in the movement as to how we can leverage all of the information and people around us, and how we can craft our messaging for them to better understand this. I remember you saying a lot of us don't even know, but I think that we need to also sort of craft it in a way that helps us understand, hey, this impacts you as well, right? And it impacts you, of course, from what you're talking about, a moral sort of responsibility that we may have as humans, but also from a fact of, did you know that there are a lot of antibiotics being used, and we don't really have a reliable way of tracking antibiotic usage from a lot of factory farms, which then could somehow also be something that affects us adversely, and it's something that so many organizations are telling us affects us adversely, right? So all of these things are absolutely necessary for us to even say, hey, these are the list of 10 reforms that we want right now, and we want to see this being enacted. And from these 10 reforms, we have, say, other reforms that branch out that can build on this.